This is Voting Unpacked, your neutral and educational guidebook to the 2024 election. This week, we will cover the philosophical question, do you have an ethical obligation to vote? More specifically, we'll look at the following argument, is that my vote alone won't determine the outcome of the election, and if my vote alone won't determine the outcome of the election, then I don't have an ethical obligation to vote. So I don't have an ethical obligation to vote. It turns out it depends what makes something an ethical obligation. Very roughly put, philosophers give three types of answers to this question, what makes something ethically right? There's the virtue approach to ethics, the action or duty approach to ethics, and a consequence approach to ethics. A virtue approach to ethics says that the right action is one that a virtuous agent would do. So you should try to cultivate virtues and do what a virtuous agent would do if you want to act morally. So let's look through this reason again in the argument we started with through the eyes of somebody who believes the virtue approach to ethics. If my vote alone won't determine the outcome of the election, then I don't have an ethical obligation to vote. Well, under the virtue approach, it wouldn't matter what the consequences of your vote is. It would just matter whether it was what a virtuous person would do. So if you think civic virtue is one virtue a virtuous agent should have, then you might think you still have an ethical obligation to vote, and this second premise is false. Let's next look at a very basic version of an action or duty approach to morality. Very roughly put, the action or duty approach to morality says that the right action is one that follows rules that you can will everybody to follow. So the right action is about the action itself, not about the person doing the action, not about the consequences, but the action itself. Let's look at this premise, our premise again. If my vote alone won't determine the outcome of the election, then I don't have an ethical obligation to vote. What would the action or duty approach to morality think about this? Well, they think the action itself is what matters to morality, not the outcome of that action. So if you can't will everybody to follow not voting, then you shouldn't make an unfair exception for yourself. Lastly, the consequence approach to morality says the right action is the one that has good consequences. So if your vote alone doesn't have any consequence to the overall election result, this does matter under the consequence approach to morality. The consequence approach might actually take issue with the first premise of the argument we've been looking at, which says my vote alone won't determine the outcome of the election. They would probably want to amend that to use the word probably. People who take a consequence view of morality don't just care about the probability of a certain outcome or consequence, but they also care about the importance of that outcome or consequence. So they look at what's called the overall expected value of a consequence. So when it comes to voting, although the probability is very, very low that your specific vote will change the entire outcome of the election, the importance of your vote, if that does happen to be the case, is really, really high. So when you look at both of those numbers together, the expected value is actually pretty high. Think of it like choosing to buckle your child into a car seat. The probability of you having an accident is really low, but the importance of keeping your child safe is really, really high. So it doesn't matter that there's a low probability because the importance is so high. This video is a part of the Voting Unpacked series produced by Broward College Online, and I'm your guide, Professor Haley Mathis. Check back every Friday leading up to the big election on November 5th for a new video to learn more about how to vote.